Hello, and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host. Thank you very much for inviting me into your home again this week. And as you can see, I am joined once again by my DC lawyer friend, Ciprian Ivanof. Hi, Ciprian. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hello again. And we're discussing how the case is actually proceeding, not just what evidence might be argued about or all the normal things in a trial. Let's remember that the jury trials are especially hard for lawyers to handle because there's a whole bunch of very specific rules about what you can tell the jury, how you conduct yourself in front of the jury. And it's a whole different skill set than for someone arguing in front of an appeals court or just a bench trial. That is a trial with only the judge as the finder of fact.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a whole different skill set.
That's right. That's right, for sure. And we are jumping right into it here, so let's go ahead and clarify what we're talking about. This show is about the Danny Masterson trial that is now finished week 2 of its process. There have been a couple of Masterson's accusers who have gone on the stand and testified as to what happened to them and how they were assaulted by Danny Masterson, a Scientology celebrity VIP, who, if you have not been keeping up on my channel or Aaron's channel where Tony Ortega is reporting, this is a pretty hot case because it involves the Church of Scientology in a more than marginal way. The staff members from the Church of Scientology were involved in sort of tamping down or negating or if you will, even covering up for Danny Masterson's assaults. And so that's been part of the case, which is why I and others have in the ex-Scientology world have been following it so closely and with such avid interest. This is not just a sexual assault case, although that all by itself is horrifying enough. There are 4 accusers in this trial, 3 of them former Scientologists who were connected with Danny Masterson and Scientology at the same time in various degrees of relationship with him, and then they went to the church for help after being assaulted and or raped. That is the term they're using, so I will use it. And the church took actions to suppress and stop them from coming forward, going to the police, making official reports about it, and that kind of thing. And this has come up through the testimony. And as what has also come up in the testimony is that Scientology, to this day, has continued its campaign of stalking and harassment against these witnesses, these victims, in an effort to intimidate them, silence them, bully them, and keep them quiet. And it is not working, but Scientology is sort of a one-hit wonder. It doesn't really know anything else to do except follow L. Ron Hubbard's playbook. And as a former Scientologist of many decades, I am well aware of what that playbook is. We've talked about it and described it in some detail on this channel. So I've invited Ciprian on this week, getting back to my guest now, because he is a lawyer, and you and I, Ciprian, have had many discussions about various aspects of Scientology and its ethics and justice system. In fact, if I remember right, one of the first things you and I talked about that you reached out to me about was discussing the ethics and justice system of Scientology. And we have done many videos and discussions breaking down and talking about it. And now we see a live court case happening in real time where this system of this really overseeing, authoritarian, very controlling system is being utilized to try to shut these women down. And now it's finally coming up in a court of law. Scientology is not on trial here. Danny Masterson is, but the Scientology actions to his criminal actions are kind of adjacent. And so this has been featuring as a pretty big plot point in the case. But as we were discussing beforehand now, getting back, Ciprian, to you, you mentioned that so far, the first 2 weeks, based on the transcriptions that Tony Ortega has been reporting on, that this looks like a fairly typical case for its kind. Did I get that right?
I mean, the specifics of the case are somewhat unusual, in that there's a larger time gap from when the alleged incidents occurred to the date of prosecution, also in terms of the facts alleged. That said, the lawyers are presenting their case as you would expect them to.
Mm.
What makes this a little different is that it's a jury trial. Mm-hmm. And the rules for how lawyers act in front of jurors it's a whole nother skill set.
Yes.
You have a lot more cautious use of language, a lot more careful wording, so that rather than just presenting a judge a piece of evidence, you have to verbally establish why you're bringing it in, presenting it to the jury so they can see it, then presenting it to the judge.
Right.
There's a whole lot more, I won't say showmanship, but there's a whole bunch more little hard to remember rules.
Right.
Arguing in front of a jury is a skill that is not taught to all lawyers.
Okay.
I did take a class in it, but it is a very unique skill, and a lot of law firms have a couple people for whom that is their entire job. Right. It's not just an ancillary part of a regular lawyer's job.
Right, right. Well, it has been, as a layperson who does not spend a lot of time, here reading court transcripts or getting into the nitty-gritty of how cases are argued. This has been a very educational experience for me. I've been reading, of course, Tony Ortega's reporting, where he's transcribing basically what's happening, because no cameras are allowed in the courtroom for what should be obvious reasons, given there are anonymous rape victims, on the stand, and their identity is not broad public knowledge. A couple of them are, and a couple of them have been reported on and doxed by the defense team in some fashion or another in the media, but that's not proper what was expected, and so the anonymity is being respected of these victims, and so there's no cameras in the courtroom. We are only hearing about this through Tony's reporting, and he's been doing a real stellar job on the ground there of reporting on this. And so it's been educational for me to see, once again, and I've said this so many times, I feel like a broken record, but I really just can't get over how different real law in a real courtroom looks and feels and flows versus what you see on TV. And for example, one thing I'll mention here is that is what you just mentioned. There are only so many things. It's a very limited set of questions and even answers that can be given in front of a jury. It's so controlled. I had no idea that the judge could control the language to such a tight degree, or that the lawyers would be admonished for straying into this territory or that territory. And you don't see in the transcripts the actions, the language, the movement of the lawyers, or even how they sound. So all you're really getting are the words. And then there's been some supplementary reporting where Tony has podcasted or talked afterwards about the nature of the discussion or the interrogation, or how the lawyers acted and looked and felt and that kind of thing. So it's been kind of putting these things together has been very interesting, but it's also been frustrating for me as a former Scientologist, knowing how deep that well goes, to see how muzzled the witnesses have to be, the victims rather, have to be when they're testifying as to what they even can say about their experience with the church and its staff. It's just been interesting. I'm not criticizing it like it's wrong, but on the other hand, it is a little frustrating. Do you have anything? Do you have any comment for me on that?
I mean, the point of a trial is to deal with a specific allegation, not to make a general judgment as to whether whether it is generally good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why evidence of other wrongdoing is generally not admissible unless there is a specific reason to mention it.
Mm.
For example, O.J. Simpson.
Oh, okay, yeah.
O.J. Simpson had committed domestic violence in other incidents.
Mm. There was a prior record of it. There's a history.
Should not be admissible in dealing with an allegation of domestic violence or murder, espousal murder, unless it is to prove that he knew how to strangle people or that he was in a state of mind where he thought he could get away with it. But evidence has to be more probative than prejudicial.
And what is that? Define what that means for the audience. Yeah.
When it comes to evidence, prejudicial evidence does not merely mean that it's unfavorable. It means that it is more likely to cause people to make a judgment before having the requisite facts, that it is likely to be misleading, prejudice, before reasoning.
Mm. What would be an example of that? What would be a clear-cut example of prejudicial evidence?
In this case,
in any case,
the critical issue here, well, one of the issues is, did Scientology prevent these women from speaking to the authorities about what happened?
Yes, that's right.
Evidence about what happened in the whole or the way people are declared would be prejudicial.
Okay.
It does not relate to specifically what is being contested.
Okay, got it. And so so I'm still a little confused about one thing you said, which is probative. That's not a word I'm familiar with. So when you say evidence must be probative, what does that mean?
Enlightening.
Oh, okay. It has to reveal facts or make the picture clearer.
Right.
Okay.
It should reveal more truth than it is likely to mislead people.
Got it. Okay. All right. So fancy way of saying that. I get it. Okay. Fair enough. Well, it has been interesting. And yes, I definitely do not expect or never expected to see anything about the whole or other, savory, sensationalistic information about Scientology entered into the testimony. But even hearing about what the women were told by Scientology officials, and specifically by, say, the chaplain at Celebrity Center International, the ethics officer at Celebrity Center International, the ethics officer over at AOLA, who had his fingers in this pie quite a bit. That's Julian Schwartz, a man I used to know and spoke with many times when I was in the Sea Org. So these are, that even those conversations or those directions or handlings that the women received at the hands of these people, and they were quite, ruthless in telling these women, according to their testimony, at least, and I believe them, that, that they are not to call this rape. This is not what that is. You cannot, in fact, be raped by your boyfriend. That's impossible. And that your job as his girlfriend, one of these women were told by the chaplain, your job is to give him sex whenever he wants it, because that's your exchange for living in his house. And he's the breadwinner, and this is pretty outrageous stuff. Unfortunately, not isolated just to the Scientology culture, but it's very much there. And so we hear about this and see this as reasoning and justification to tell these women that they are not to report on this. They're not to say anything about it. And in fact, what happened to them isn't really what happened to them. Standard cult gaslighting 101. It's rife throughout Scientology, and these are just more examples of it. But even there, they are limited in how much they could talk about or describe that. There really were only little snippets able to be given on that in their testimony. There's no, what surprised me was there's no long narratives in their testimony. It's question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. Very clipped, very short. this is the question I want, only that precise answer, and you are not, and it's not, okay, tell me what happened, and then they go on this long story like you see on TV. Oh, I trusted him, and I this, and I that. It's short and to the point. And I again, I'm saying that was not something I expected to see.
There's a lot of danger in letting a witness ramble on, because the odds of them saying something impermissible or accidentally damaging increase exponentially.
Right.
So one of the basic types of witness preparation is to tell them to be short and to think about what they're going to say, because otherwise, if they just ramble on, they could bring in something that is prejudicial, or that would completely destroy their case, or look like it was destroying their case.
Right.
The better thing to do is to tell the lawyer what happened, and the lawyer plans out the questions that brings it out, without running the risk of the person destroying the case by rambling on and bringing in something else.
Right. And that makes sense. Like I said, I get it. It's just so different from how it's presented in, movies and TV. So the expectation of what you're going to see versus the reality is always such a stark difference. Have you noticed, or I have a question I have for you, and I'm sure this is a question a lot of people have watching this trial. Is there a chance, is there any sort of precedent or chance of, the testimony that these women give about the wrongdoing of Scientology, would that ever lead to any sort of criminal attention being thrown in Scientology's direction as a result of this trial, or is that just a fantasy that's never going to happen?
They're alleging witness tampering, at the very least.
So that could result in sanctions or charges or investigation, at least, into what's up with that?
Yes, but here's the thing, that would be very hard to prosecute, because of how closely it is intertwined with Scientology doctrine. You can't prosecute a person's morals. You can prosecute behavior, but finding out the dividing line between them is a very specific and intensive process.
Yeah, very much so.
So what they did was quite if they were simply giving a moral evaluation, that is one thing. If they are trying to pressure a witness into not testifying, that is quite another.
Right.
So,
right. Well, they have shown now, at least here, okay, in the pre-trial, they showed, the judge saw, the exact Scientology justice codes which prohibit a Scientologist from going to the police or testifying or even showing up in court to testify against another Scientologist, and that those rules were used to, keep these women from moving forward or reporting to the authorities what had happened. That has not yet come up in the testimony during the trial itself. Do you see something like that coming up or coming out as in this, or do you think that's even necessary to go there?
I'm unsure what you're asking.
Oh, well, so far, the actual Scientology scriptures, as written in the book, Introduction to Scientology Ethics, that's in the evidence. That book, in whole, is there to be referred to. But they haven't referred to it yet or really done much of anything with it yet. So I guess my question is, based on what you've seen so far of the first two witnesses and how the testimony has gone, do you see it possible that that book might come back and be opened up as part of what's going on with these women and their mindset? Because so far, all the testimony about Scientology has been to give the jury the mindset that the women were in, and they are going to great lengths to make clear This is not a judgment about whether Scientology really does this or not. It's these women thought that that's what was going on or what was going to happen to them, and therefore that's why they didn't go and report these rapes much earlier to the police. That's kind of what I get is being done in this trial so far. So I guess I'm just wondering how much deeper they can or will go, and I'm just asking your opinion about that.
I don't know if the Scientology ethics book will be brought to the jury. Most of what I saw was focusing on the police reports.
Right, and that's mostly been from the defense. They've been trying to poke holes in the women's stories using the police reports.
Yep. And there, that just went as expected.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if they would try to make a big deal about the entire ethics manual, but I would strongly suspect that they might reference a few paragraphs of the of keeping Scientology working. A few paragraphs. At most.
Right.
It is a very high-risk thing to bring it up.
Yeah, I don't see them going in that direction particularly.
During voir dire, one of the things that was specifically an issue was, did the potential jurors feel biased against Scientology?
Right. That's a fancy word you use there for jury selection, by the way, to the audience out there. He was referring to the jury selection process.
Voir dire is jury selection. It's when you have a bunch of potential jurors get interviewed and selected, and there's a variety of different rules for it.
Right.
And the goal is to find jurors that are not biased in favor of any given side. And one of the acknowledged goals is to make sure there aren't people with specific knowledge of the subject matter.
Right.
So, so that it is entirely dependent on the evidence provided and the persuasion by the parties in the case.
Right.
Not people coming into it with their own ideas.
Okay, so let me ask you about a couple of things. I'm sorry, go ahead. What were you going to say there?
So if there's, say, a nurse that has dealt with rape victims, that would be very worrying if they're on the jury.
Right. That's right. And it went pretty quick as far as whittling their pool down and getting to jurors who did say, absolutely attested to the fact that no, they could be impartial in this. They were not hampered by viewing Leah's show or Going Clear or anything like that. They had an objective view or could hold an objective view of this, and I guess they get taken at their word when it comes to the jury selection process with that. Yeah,
largely yes. I mean, ostensibly, there's supposed to be ways to weed out if someone is horribly biased, but a lot of it just comes down to asking people questions and hoping they're telling the truth.
Exactly.
And you have a number of preemptory challenges. Sometimes the parties can say, for whatever reason, I don't want this person on the jury. So they can exclude people based on, are they impermissibly biased? Or if it is part of their automatic, we don't want these people on the jury cards.
Right.
In this case, I mean, look, it's California. Presumably everybody there has heard of Scientology.
Well, exactly.
So the big struggle is, are these people impermissibly biased? And that really just comes down to how good they are at compartmentalizing.
Right. There's only a few comments here and there about this in the reporting, but Tony definitely has noted in a few places, and I've been impressed by this, that Judge Almeida, the woman in charge of this whole thing, the judge, is very one, knowledgeable, very, very much seems very scholarly, definitely dives into the case law. But she's also very good at moving things along. Like, she is very no nonsense about this. She wants this thing moving forward and progress being made on a daily basis. And they've already seated a jury, gotten witnesses. I mean, they're 2 weeks into this thing, and they have gone through a couple of the victims' testimonies so far. They brought a couple police in, a couple other corroborating witnesses, and meanwhile, as noted elsewhere, the Harvey Weinstein trial down the hall is still figuring out its jury. Do you note? I mean, did you notice that or anything about the judge that seems to strike you as unique or different about her approach to this? That she's like kind of moving this thing along. Is that unusual, or is the slow train the unusual part of of what we're seeing?
It really depends on specifics.
Okay, so there isn't an average here.
I mean, some judges really do have a personality that is just go, 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 go. I'll worry about the objections later, and that's possible in some cases. I would strongly suspect that the Harvey Weinstein trial is being held up by a whole bunch of objections by a legal team that is substantially more competent than Scientology's. So there's likely to be a lot more difficulty for the judge if the judge decides, I'll disregard the objection and keep going.
Somebody described...
But then there's also personality. Some judges just like to lean back and listen to the arguments and rely on the particular parties to raise objections or to point out misconduct. Interestingly, based on some of the notes that Tony Ortega made, she seems to be taking direct control of the courtroom. Yeah, which may be especially necessary in this case.
Yeah, I noticed that.
This may be her deciding not to take any guff and deciding to be much more brief with the parties than would be tolerated in a much more high-profile case.
Well, it is interesting that, again, as noted elsewhere, Los Angeles doesn't have a long...
I will say that more than 3 days for a trial like this, somebody must have had a compelling argument, because a lot of trials actually get handled in a lot less time than this trial is being allocated.
This trial?
So
four accusers of a celebrity VIP, and this trial is taking longer than usual, you're saying?
This is taking longer than an ordinary rape case.
Really? With multiple accusers? Huh.
Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting to me. I didn't think about that too much. I thought we were moving along at a pretty good clip, all things considered. I mean, Almeida is without
relative
question.
to all the objections Scientology is trying to raise, yes.
Yeah. I mean, they're objecting to every other thing.
But
there's also been 4 requests so far. 6 requests for mistrial. I mean,
one of the notes was the judge specifically addressing that. I
mean, that's unusual, right? For a defense to just keep begging for a mistrial?
Yes, that is unusual.
Okay.
I strongly suspect that is Scientology just trying to buy time.
Yeah.
Well, at least I think that's what the justification of the Scientology lawyers are.
Right.
What I think they're really doing is trying to run off the bill.
Oh, you do?
Or buy more time for witness intimidation. Or to try to grab together any spare witness they can, because that gets back to one of the things that's really mind-boggling for me. In a case as high profile as Danny Masterson, where's all the defense witnesses?
Yeah, talk about this, because you mentioned this before the show. What are you looking at there?
The witness list provided by Tony Ortega has quite a few witnesses for the prosecution. A bunch of LAPD officers, the Jane Does, and while Jane Doe 4 is mentioned, she is not. Her allegations are not being tried here.
Whose?
Jane Doe 4.
Oh, okay.
Another victim.
Yeah.
This is about the cases of 3 Jane Does, not the 4th victim.
Oh, did I get that wrong? I thought there were 4 accusers in this trial.
She's not part of she is being used as a witness, not as her case is not being handled here right now.
Oh, got it. Okay. Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying that for me and correcting me on that. That's good to know. So what was that business about? You expected to see a lot more character witnesses and more on the side of the defense in this case?
Yes.
And it's interesting that they're not there.
The defense witnesses are Dr. Daniel Buffington, forensic toxicologist, presumably to deal with the date rape drug suspicions that were raised. Dr. Mitch Eisen, a memory expert, which sounds a whole lot like psychiatry to me. And let's be clear, eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable. So
yes,
you would expect to see that being contested in a rape case where you don't have a lot of extrinsic evidence.
Yes, of course. Especially, and on this side, on this one, the defense really does have the advantage, Masterson's side does, because of the fact that 2 decades have passed in almost every one of these cases of these women, and when they say this happened, and memory, and do you remember this, and did you say that, and did you say this, and did you tell them that? This is what the questioning is all centered around in challenging these women's testimony is, you know, are they reliable? Did they get the facts right? Or are they actually colluding? And the defense's position is that these women have colluded after the fact to agree on their stories and then, you know, and change what they said before. That seems to be what their entire argument is all about. Is that what you're seeing?
That is at least a core part of their argument, which is why the initial LAPD investigation was so interesting, in that the fact that there was an initial LAPD investigation with a report that can be used for much more proximate details means that a memories fade with time or evidence disappears with time argument can't be as effectively made. If you've already got reports that were made to the LAPD or in these women's files, then you don't have as significant a memory argument.
Right, exactly.
So and while eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, and decays rapidly with time, a report made within a couple of weeks or months is much more likely to be reliable. And if it is consistently adhered to, that is also some evidence towards the presumed sincerity of that initial report.
Sure. Yeah, in other words, they're probably telling the truth if they were, you know, trying to make a case out of this back then. And they were. These women did go outside the bounds of what Scientology directed them to do because they were getting so little help, so much punishment and nonsense from the church and from other sources. And so they, you know, in desperation, finally broke free and went and made reports about this. So a couple of them did. One, I think that it's a little confusing as to who did what exactly when, because I've not been diagramming this out on a timeline, but certainly there is, what you just described there. So hopefully the jury will see that.
Yes. But it's just amazing how few defense witnesses there are.
Yeah, on that point. What do you expect to see in terms of
one
character?
toxicologist, 2 memory experts, and Reese for his assistant.
Right. Whose name has come up prominently from a couple of the victims. So what are like, because we're not seeing it in this trial, and I guess we're not going to see it. What is a character witness, and what role would that serve in this case? And why do you think there aren't any?
Character evidence is a very difficult to explain concept.
Mm-hmm.
At least when character evidence was initially discussed in U.S. law, it was around the 1920s, and it had more to do with, does this prove that this guy is one of a certain archetype that is a good actor or a bad actor? Since then, it has kind of morphed into considering, is this person generally trustworthy, or does this person have a propensity to lie, or do other bad acts? There's a lot of rules about what character evidence can or cannot be introduced. But generally, the defense has an easier time introducing character evidence to defend the defendant than the prosecution does.
And okay, so the fact that there aren't any of those kinds of witnesses on the defense list, what does that communicate to you? Because I don't know why there wouldn't be any there. It seems like you'd want to pack them, and it certainly seems like somebody like Danny Masterson would be able to assemble a legion of people who would go on a stand and talk, positively about him.
What the prosecution is trying to do is to present character evidence that Danny Masterson is violent, has been abusive towards people. And I mean, normally you'd expect that to be contested by the defense. And you'd normally expect rebuttal witnesses to come in and say, no, Danny Masterson has never been cruel to me, or Danny Masterson has always told the truth. And I mean, even mobsters can get in character witnesses.
Wow. So what does it say for this case that there aren't any of those? Do you have any idea?
It's so easy that it...
What's up with that?
I don't know why there aren't any here. This is just really surprising to me. And I mean, the logic for having character witnesses is pretty pressing here, because that's going to be an important, probably one of the most important arguments they can make. I can see a couple of reasons why the defense would not have a bunch of character witnesses. One, they're trying to present we're being completely objective here, and we're not going to bring in any subjective material, and that includes character witnesses. And if they're going to rely on memory experts, it would weaken their memory expert argument if they brought in witnesses whose sole testimony relied on memory.
Okay, fair enough.
There's another issue, which may be that Danny Masterson may not actually be a very popular guy.
Well, that's the one I jumped to, but I didn't want to. Scientology. Yeah. I didn't want to jump to that conclusion. Yeah, nobody likes the guy, enough to go on a stand in a court of law and actually attest to that fact. That's but I didn't want to jump to that one.
I mean, that is just a really small witness list, and I'm just plain amazed at that.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you this then, and then maybe I think we'll probably have to move toward wrapping up, because I wanted to keep this to an hour and sort of just go over some of these key points. I know this isn't like, we're just spitballing and talking, what ifs here and stuff. What about Danny Masterson taking the stand?
What about Danny
Masterson taking the stand? Do you think that's likely, or do you think they'll keep him from testifying?
If he would, it would allow impeachment evidence to be introduced. That is, evidence that he may have been lying or mistaken or a whole bunch of things.
Mm.
So if he takes a stand, you end up with a bunch of other evidence that could be introduced.
Oh, to disprove, to react to his testimony? To refute his testimony. Okay. So if he doesn't testify, it's probably going to be better for him.
It's generally a bad idea for defendants to testify on their own behalf unless it is part of a carefully planned strategy.
Interesting.
Okay. In this case, all Danny Masterson has to do to win is to prove that the women's testimony was unreliable.
Right.
If he does anything more than that, and starts to make himself an issue of credibility, it could very easily turn into a matter of, do I trust these women more than I trust Danny Masterson?
Right.
And that would not play out well for him.
No, I'm sure it wouldn't. I'm sure it wouldn't, especially with these. Sure it wouldn't. I don't know what words he could say to go up there and bedazzle the jury, about what a wonderful person he is. I'm sure he'll keep his mouth shut. How interesting. What do you see, or do you see anything that might point to an early indication of how this is going? We're not really hearing much of anything in the reporting about how the jury is receiving this information. There was one report today that one of the lawyers was complaining to the judge after the jury had been dismissed for the day that one of them looked like they were falling asleep during the trial. And the lawyer was bringing this up as a point. Other than that, there hasn't really been a lot of commentary about the jury.
There's oftentimes a lot of guesswork when it comes to jury reactions.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that is because lawyers want feedback. If they can't tell what the jury is, if they can't even make a guess what the jury is thinking, they're going to be unnerved. That's probably one reason why Justice Thomas gets so much hate, because he maintains a poker face and doesn't say much during oral arguments. When you're making an argument and you can't see any reactions, all your fears and doubts become much, much more notable.
For sure.
So
very true.
Lawyers will engage in wishful thinking. I'm confident I can predict this jury, right, man? Come on. I really think that I got this, because if I don't, I'm just going to be in a bundle of nerves.
Right.
For the jury, probably the biggest predictor is just how do they act at voir dire, at jury selection, when they are relatively free to speak.
Right. That's where you'd really want to watch them. Yeah.
And I mean, trials can be boring. So a juror falling asleep, that's not horribly unusual.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a statement as to what they believe about the credibility of the evidence, just a matter of, come on, we've been at this for 5 hours. I'm just bored as heck.
Right. Right. And I could see how that could happen because some of this testimony is incredibly dry and some of it is not. I mean, some of what these women had to say was outright tragic and even heart-rending, but heart-rending, I should say. But the back and forth and the dates and the times and the this and did you say this in this report and this other thing definitely looks to me like it could be boring as hell, you know, trying to wade through all that stuff because they keep throwing out dates and times, and the witnesses themselves on the stand are saying, "You're confusing me. I don't understand what, where are we at now?" Because the way the defense goes back and forth on that. So, I'm told, I've heard, I think Tony said this in a podcast he did last week that Cohen, the defense attorney, the lead defense attorney, is been described as a good lawyer with a bad case. What do you think about that from what you've seen?
That sounds plausible. His trying to make an issue of not remembering the dates and specifics of the testimony to the LAPD is probably the best he can do with that difficult fact.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's no way to use evidence to refute what these women are saying. I mean, it could have happened. It's completely, you know, with photographs of the crime scenes, you know, the alleged crime scenes, that, you know, his home and this kind of thing. I mean, all of it's very plausible that it could have happened.
I mean, to win, he has to raise enough doubt as to the facts of what took place, and that largely comes down to, are these women accurately describing the situation? Some of that can go to memory, some of that can go to motive, but fundamentally, he has to confront the initial LAPD investigation or whatever documentation Scientology has. And that's going to be really freaking hard.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think he can win this one. His best bet is to just raise enough doubt, and that's what he's got memory experts for.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And yet you have, you know, you also have things I've read from memory experts and what I know about, you know, neuroscience memory myself, that trauma and traumatic episodes tend to stick in our memory in such a way that it never goes away. And I doubt that their memory expert will talk about that, but it is a thing, you know.
There's been some serious doubt about the idea of flashbulb memory, but the issue that these women may have been acting in ways that seem counterintuitive to the general population is something that the prosecution would have to face.
Yeah.
One of the Jane Does talked about crawling off the bed and hiding in a closet, which does not seem normal to some people, or the long delay in reporting it to the police a second time does not make sense to a lot of people. That is something the prosecution has to address.
Sure.
And that is where having a rival memory expert to say, no, these events would not have been that traumatic that people would have acted that way, would be an essential part of the defense's strategy.
Yeah, well,
so a lot of this comes down to traumatic incidents. How do people react?
Yeah.
And you can see from the transcript, some of the jury was thinking, hey, the delay is odd. What's going on here?
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, that's why the prosecution is getting such latitude to bring Scientology into this in the first place, is because that is the state of mind of the women, which is why they didn't go and report, you know, et cetera. So I hope that's getting across to the jury, because that's very much part of the prosecution's argument.
It has to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
don't really see any other kinds of arguments they can make.
No, I thought so far they were doing okay with that. I don't know what the jury thinks. I don't even know what any of these jurists look like, but I hope they're getting this because there's been enough references to it and enough statements made by the witnesses that it should be clear there's a whole backstory there with this Scientology involvement. And the statements from the chaplain and the ethics officers from Celebrity Center were awful enough that I hope it gets across that they were not getting any support or help, but in fact just the opposite from their quote unquote church, who they went to for help, you know. And we still have to hear from another witness, another accuser. So it'll be interesting to see what comes up next week.
What I am surprised at is that they didn't bring the chaplain in as a witness.
Oh, God, I wish they could. I really, really, really wish they could bring Julian Schwartz in on the stand, because I knew that guy. And Scoggins, this guy, Chris Scoggins, he's the chaplain. And this is another guy I knew in the Sea Org. I didn't know him well. He wasn't friends of mine, but I knew him, worked with him. So to see their names coming up and see, it would be, I would love to see these guys take the stand. Their oaths of honesty wouldn't mean anything to them as Sea Org members. They would ignore that very easily and lie as needed. But I think that Mueller, the prosecution team, could possibly poke holes in their lies if they tried that. It would be interesting to see. But it doesn't look like it's on the list, so I don't think. Do you think that such a thing could happen later in the trial that's not on the list now, that we could see that, or is that not a possibility?
I mean, there's a couple factors here. One, you have the best evidence rule, that if something is being alleged, the best version of that evidence has to be introduced. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that means testimony that can be cross-examined. So if one of the victims is claiming that they were told something, that would mean bringing in the person who allegedly told them that.
Right. That's why the boyfriend or the husband or these various people were brought in, yeah? To corroborate their testimony.
So that is, you'd expect the chaplain or the master at arms to be brought in if they were going to make an issue of why did these women not report for so long.
Right.
And the jury was told that that would be addressed. At this point, I don't know if that's really been addressed.
Right. What do you think about this idea? Because this may or may not be a strategic point on the part of the prosecution. It's very, very, very likely that if those names of those Sea Org members were put on a witness list, or it starts to become clear or apparent that they might be called to be witnesses, that those specific Sea Org members would be disappeared, literally sent out of the country. And the claim would be no one knows where they went or where they are, or they can't be found. To prevent them from going into the courtroom. And such a thing might make the prosecution then look like it had a weaker case if it was going to bring these guys in, and then the church denies access to them. So maybe they're sort of not bringing them in for the reason that they're not wanting the church to, cut them off at the knees on their own case. What do you think about that?
Well, the party that causes evidence to disappear has it construed against.
But would it even be able to be, would the jury ever be able to be told, well, we wanted to call this guy, but, he's out of the country or nobody can find him. The jury would never even find that out. Not unless there was already a ruling about the admissibility of that. Okay. And that may be admissible if it was found by the judge
that the evidence had been disappeared by the defense.
Right. But on the off chance it might come up in front of the jury.
Wrongfully disappeared by the defense.
Yeah. So I guess.
But that would be at the end of at least several days worth of wrangling.
Right. Right. It'd be interesting. I'm positive that if that were to be the case, that they would get disappeared. I mean, Julian Schwartz has been a pretty valuable Sea Org member for a number of years in Scientology. At least he was up until the point I left in 2013. I don't know. I can't speak to what he's been up to since then. But he literally told me out of his own lips. I mean, back in the day when I was working with him as a management staff member, and he was an ethics officer. It is still, as far as I know, at AOLA. He told me directly, my directions and orders come from RTC. I report to RTC on most of the cycles, most of the people I deal with, because there's an RTC office.
AOLA to RTC.
Yeah, let me tell you, there's a physical office in AOLA, in the Advanced Organization of Los Angeles, the big blue buildings. At that organization, there is a PAC RTC office. And there are 2 RTC staff permanently assigned there. At least they were when I was there. And Julian Schwartz is the ethics officer, the MAA, at AOLA. He's one of the head ones. And he, therefore, deals with the hot celebrity type ethics actions and handlings and having to shut people up and all of that. And he told me one day, because I was trying to get him to deal with a backlog of people who had been stacking up who hadn't been seen, and I was trying to speed it up to get more people through the ethics handlings they needed so they could get on to the OT levels, which is the primary purpose for that organization. It's to deliver OT levels 1 through 5. So his job was to give people ethics clearance, and if they didn't have ethics clearance, to work with them and handle them so that they did, so that they could do their OT levels. You don't just pay for them, you have to get cleared to do them. And he's one of the gatekeepers. He's, in fact, the chief gatekeeper. But he was always working on these hot, sensitive cycles that nobody could know anything about. For example, Jason Begay, one of the biggest, ex-Scientology actor, spoke out about it when he came out. Now he doesn't really talk about it much, but he's on TV and he's just got on with his life. But he was being handled by Julian Schwartz. And this whole Danny Masterson thing was being handled by Julian Schwartz. And he made it clear to me that he couldn't deal with all of these people who were actually paying for Scientology. He didn't have the time for them because he was being directed by RTC on these very specific hot people that he had to deal with, celebrities and stuff. And so, that connects dots between this case, Julian Schwartz, and David Miscavige. Like, they're all right there. So I am positive that that's a guy that they would want to keep off the stand at any cost, because it could end up impugning David Miscavige or his organization. Thoughts?
That makes sense. While the evidence gathered from putting Schwartz on the stand would probably not be admissible beyond this case, he might let slip details that might clarify other situations, and the information bleed from Scientology would be made even more dramatic.
Yeah, exactly. So why risk it, right? Why even take the risk? Easier to just disappear these people until the heat comes off, and then bring them back when nobody cares.
There's legal ways to deal with that, but it would take the prosecution just standing firm and being willing to tolerate more delays, as the evidence would have to be argued.
Right.
But
Nobody wants that.
I suppose it might be easier to just negotiate with the defense to you don't raise this issue, and we won't try to call this guy as a witness.
Yeah.
So,
Well, interesting stuff. Any other points that you want to mention about what you observed about the case so far that you think our audience might be interested in hearing before we wrap up?
The issues being raised in the defense are just a lot narrower than I expected. And I don't know how popular Masterson is in Scientology, but I would have expected there to at least be a bunch of witnesses claiming that, oh, yeah, I heard Jane Doe talk about this and she said something completely different. I'm not seeing that. Right. That is unexpected to me.
Interesting.
So, I mean, even mobsters can get someone to lie for them.
Well, that's the thing.
Scientology probably has a lot less morals than the mob.
Yeah, they're about on the same moral plane. I am surprised too. Now that you've brought it up, it's very surprising to me because the way they killed the LAPD investigation, by the way, on the part of one of these victims back in 2003 or 4 was back in 2004 was a batch of affidavits, like, oh no, Danny Masterson's great guy, never did anything like that, absolutely not. Like, there was plenty of people to support him when that investigation was happening oh no, there's no way that could have happened. So much so that the LAPD went, okay, fine, we're not going to continue investigating this, and they dropped it. So the investigation happened, and we have the paperwork from that, but the LAPD did drop this case because of, at least that's what's been reported, because of all these affidavits and testimonials they received from Scientologists supporting Masterson. So the fact they're not doing that now is very interesting.
So why aren't they trying that this time?
Yeah, don't know. Except that they want to keep Scientology out of the courtroom as much as possible, so maybe they don't want to bring more Scientologists in there. It's the only thing I can think of on the limited data that I have.
And I'm going to point out that as a defendant, a lot of the time the defense can ask for a bench trial. So if their fear was the jury hearing a lot about the ties to Scientology, the defense could have avoided that.
And what exactly?
So
a bench trial being trial by judge only?
Right. So the point is that you have the finder of fact and the finder of law. The judge is always the finder of law. But in a jury trial, the jury finds the facts. And in a bench trial, the judge finds the facts.
Okay. Interesting.
So if they just bench trials, that is just in front of a judge, they tend to go a lot faster. You tend not to have as many sidebars with the jury, and you tend to have a lot less risk of inadmissible evidence making an appeal viable. So maybe one of the things here is that they're hoping the prosecution oversteps its bounds, and that allows it to be appealed.
Right.
Just a thought.
Right. Well, plus their strategy clearly is ask for a mistrial at every possible opportunity. So they are definitely gunning for that, which I think is a carryover from Misero's strategies, actually, their first defense attorney. Okay. Well, Ciprian, I want to thank you for taking the time to comment on this and help me talk about this with the audience out here, and for your opinions and thoughts about this. I really appreciate it.
This did not go the way I expected. I expected lots of hard to disprove a defense witness testimony that would result in a whole chain of people being impeached. None of that's happening.
No.
And that's, given how easy it is to do that, that suggests even greater secretiveness than I anticipated. I'm pretty sure the mandate Scientology couldn't coordinate the stories enough to make it work.
Well, exactly. And then accuse the women of doing that. right? Because that's what they're doing.
Right.
They're accusing the women of colluding and agreeing on their stories and stuff. So, yeah, interesting stuff. All right. Well, folks out there, thank you very much for tuning in, for listening to us gab on about this. I hope some of this was interesting and educational and informative. That's always the goal here on the show. And of course, I want to put a plug in for supporting the channel. If you do find the content here entertaining, informative, and educational, then perhaps consider supporting the show, either through Patreon, PayPal, Venmo, whatever. Show us some love, buy me a cup of coffee, whatever. All right, guys, I will see you next week. Bye-bye.